Talk, music, get it all
24 hours
on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar.
WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and Freetown, 1 p.m. in Lagos. Good afternoon. Welcome to Newslink, live on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM and worldwide at wadr.org. Here are the top stories. Momentum builds up as Liberians take to the streets today demanding accountability for 90 million drug seizure.
Regardless of their sinister motive, not a single protester will retreat but will turn out in mass. Liberia's future hangs in the balance.
African leaders and civil society call for reforms to curb growing influence of money in politics. A court gives Nigeria's Electoral Commission the green light to kickstart preparations for 2027 polls.
The timetable that INEC issued did not run foul of the provisions of the Electoral Act that provides the timelines for submission of list of candidates.
Guinea-Bissau deepens partnership with Russia in key sectors, including food security. Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Augustine Bill Coley.
Thank you for joining us. We begin in Liberia, where momentum is building up as the citizens are set to take to the streets of Monrovia today for an anti-drug protest organized by Solidarity and Trust for a New Day, known as a Stand. They are demanding accountability over the reported $19.2 million cocaine case and broader governance concern. Tensions rose ahead of the march after police warned of possible attempts to disrupt the demonstration with violence. WDR's Monrovia correspondent Ibrahim Paco reports.
The Inspector General of Police, Greco Como, says authorities have intercepted suspected Molotov cocktails allegedly linked to plans to disrupt a planned protest in Monrovia. Como warned that those responsible will face prosecution while assuring citizens that police will protect the right to peaceful assembly.
The Liberia National Police has identified Mr. Collie Bobo as a principal suspect in an ongoing investigation concerning the alleged distribution of illegal firearms intended to facilitate criminal activities during the protest. All investigative actions are being conducted within the framework of the law.
But the stand chairman Moluba Malu rejected the allegations, accusing authorities of trying to discredit the demonstration. He said the planned peaceful protest is aimed at demanding accountability, including a credible investigation into the reported $19 million cocaine case.
We are peaceful protesters and we will always remain committed. Regardless of their sinister motive, not a single protester will retreat but will turn out in mass. Liberia's future hangs in the balance.
Since the June 2026 cocaine seizure at the Rappers International Airport, rights activists and anti-corruption groups have raised the concerns over a possible cover-up, demanding a transparent investigation and the prosecution of those responsible. Ahead of today's protest, security forces have been deployed across Monrovia, while organizers expect thousands of citizens to take part in the march. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Multi-stakeholders from across Africa are calling for urgent reforms to curb the growing influence of money in politics. The call is contained in the Accra Declaration on Regulating Political Finance into Advanced Integrity in Africa, adopted at the end of a regional conference held this week in Accra, Ghana, organized by the Open Society Foundation's OSF. The declaration urges the implementation of global and continental anti-corruption commitments. It warns that elections are increasingly being driven by wealthy financiers rather than the will of the people, making elected leaders more accountable to their financial backers than to the citizens. Mendwe Mweke, the Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at Open Society Foundations, explains the details of the declaration.
The declaration called for the need to advocate for implementation of global and continental resolutions on combating and preventing corruption and political finance globally. One of them is the United Nations resolution on combating and preventing corruption, and the other one is linked to implementing Article 10 of the AU Convention on preventing corruption at country level, which actually speaks to political financing. The second call to action was to ensure that we commit to an initiative, a grand initiative by the AU Advisory Board against corruption to develop a model law on political financing in Africa that will help member states implement Article 10 of the Convention, of the AU Convention in preventing corruption at country level. Thirdly, we also called for the need to establish and expand a community of practice, which is really a platform of multi-stakeholders from researchers, civil society, academics, policymakers, policy change makers, to really build this body of work and knowledge on a knowledge generation, including public information sharing around the issue of money politics and alternative solutions that we can come up with to address the issue.
Mwende Mweke is the Associate Director for Democratic Futures Program at Open Society Foundations, OSIWA. We'll bring you details of the conversation during the guest interview. Elsewhere in Nigeria, the Court of Appeal has upheld the Independent National Electoral Commission's guidelines for the 2027 general elections, overturning an earlier Federal High Court judgment that nullified parts of the regulations. The ruling has been seen as a major legal victory for the Electoral Commission as political activities gradually built up ahead of the polls. WDR's Yechenusa Setu in Abuja reports.
The Court of Appeal on Thursday upheld the legality of the Independent National Electoral Commission's guidelines for the 2027 general elections, overturning an earlier Federal High Court decision that had challenged parts of the regulations. The three-member panel ruled that INEC acted within its constitutional powers in setting the guidelines, allowing the electoral body to continue preparations for the polls. The case was brought by the Young Progressives Party, which contested provisions on the nomination and submission of candidates. Reacting to the developments, Samson Itodo of Yaga Africa says the ruling provides clarity for the electoral process.
It is within INEC's constitutional powers to issue timetable, and that the timetable that INEC issued did not run foul of the provisions of the Electoral Act that provides the timelines for submission of list of candidates.
Meanwhile, Nigerians are calling on the electoral body to organize a transparent and credible election in 2027.
At least there is now more clarity about the rules ahead of the 2027 elections.
INEC has to start now to demonstrate that they are ready in checking the malpractices of politicians
and openly addressing concerns about technology and logistics and proactively countering misinformation.
While the Court of Appeal ruling clears a legal path for the 2027 elections, many Nigerians say the bigger test remains electoral reform, strengthening INEC's independence, improving results transparency, curbing electoral violence, and ensuring that votes truly reflect the will of the people. For WADR, Yechini Sasetu in Abuja.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Russia has reaffirmed its support for efforts to restore relations between the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and several West African countries. This announcement follows high-level talks in Moscow on Thursday. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made the remarks after meeting with Guinea-Bissau's Foreign Minister Fatoumata Diaw. Details with Deborah Amour.
The discussions between Russia and Guinea-Bissau's foreign ministers focused on regional cooperation and broader international developments, including the growing shift toward a multipolar global order. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed the importance of respecting the principles of the United Nations Charter and every nation's right to determine its own path of development without external interference.
In this context, we, Russia, have firmly reaffirmed our support for any efforts to normalize relations between the Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS, as well as Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso on the other hand. And we believe that these same four countries should fully participate in the African Union.
Meanwhile, Guinea-Bissau's Foreign Minister Fatoumata Diaw welcomed the continued cooperation between the two countries. She described the talks as an opportunity to strengthen bilateral relations and discuss issues of mutual interest.
It is in the spirit that we are here today to deepen and to diversify our partnership with the Russian Federation. We see significant opportunities for that to take place in agriculture, in food security, in fisheries and blue economy, as well as higher education.
The meeting forms part of Russia's broader diplomatic engagement with African nations as it seeks to deepen political, economic and security ties across the continent.
Deborah Amour with those details. In Guinea, members of the 10th legislature are officially being installed today, Friday, marking the beginning of a new parliamentary session. The new National Assembly will have 147 lawmakers, a significant increase from the previous 83 seats. Citizens say they expect the new parliament to address pressing concerns, including rising living costs, housing challenges, stronger oversight of government's actions, and the adoption of laws protecting the rights of freedoms of Guineans. Veronica Jai tells us more.
Guinea's 10th legislature will be inaugurated at the Congress Hall of the People's Palace, where the country's 147 newly elected lawmakers will officially take office. Over the next 5 years, they will be responsible for passing legislation and overseeing government actions. Many Guineans hope the new parliament will prioritize urgent social and economic issues. These include the rising cost of living, housing, and improved public services. The installation of the new National Assembly will also mark the formal end of Guinea's military-led transition, which began after the September 5th, 2021 coup.
A report by Conakry correspondent Channel Alpha Ibrahim Ambalde, voiced by Veronica Njai. In Burkina Faso, transitional president Captain Ibrahim Traoré was on an outreach campaign in the country's troubled north. On Thursday, he arrived in Waiguya to meet local authorities, traditional leaders, civil society, and residents as his government steps up efforts to restore security and revive communities affected by years of conflict. The visit comes at a time when many people in the northern region continue to face severe shortages of food and clean water, while insecurity limits access to health care and education. So beyond the public engagement, what does Traoré's regional tour reveal about his government's security strategy and political priorities? Here's an analysis by Imo Edit.
By taking his regional tour to Waiguya, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is signaling that communities on the front lines of the conflict remain central to his government's agenda. The large crowds that welcome him in Waiguya on Thursday reinforce that narrative at a time when the military government is under pressure to deliver on its pledge to restore security and reclaim areas controlled by non-state actors. Since seizing power in 2022, Traoré has favored direct engagement with citizens, using regional visits to project the image of a leader closely connected to the people. Beyond the symbolism, the visit provides an opportunity for local authorities, civil society, and community leaders to voice their concerns while the government outlines its plans for security and economic recovery. The trip also has regional implications. As chair of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, Traoré is seeking to show that lasting stability depends not only on military operations, but also on rebuilding trust between governments and the people they serve. But analysts caution that public outreach alone will not be enough. They say these visits will ultimately be judged by tangible results: greater security, restored public services, renewed economic opportunities, and the safe return of displaced families. As a reminder, years of insecurity have displaced hundreds of thousands of people in northern Burkina Faso, left many communities struggling to access food, clean water and healthcare, while the closure of schools in several areas has further deepened the humanitarian crisis.
An analysis by Imo Edit. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM and worldwide at wadr.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Momentum builds up as Liberians take to the streets of Monrovia today, demanding accountability for 19 million drug seizure. African leaders and civil society call for reforms to curb growing influence of money in politics. A court gives Nigeria's Electoral Commission green light to kickstart preparations for 2027 polls. Guinea-Bissau deepens partnership with Russia in key sectors, including food security. Still ahead in the news, we have the guest interview and the sports. Please stay with us.
Connecting Ghana to West Africa. This is Nadidi Tete in Accra, and you're listening to WADR 94.9 FM, Dakar.
Thank you for staying with us. We are streaming live on YouTube at WADR News and on Facebook, WADR English Service. A proposal to reintroduce two public tribunals into Ghana's justice system has sparked a sharp divide in Parliament. While the government says the reforms will speed up justice delivery and reduce the backlog of cases, the opposition argues the move risks reviving painful memories of the country's past tribunal system. The debate has pitted Minority Leader Alexander Afenyo-Makin against Attorney General Dominique Ayeni. From Accra, Nadia Tete reports.
The controversy centers on the Tribunal Bill 2026, which seeks to re-establish regional and district tribunals as part of Ghana's judiciary. Government says the tribunals are provided for under the 1992 Constitution, but have remained largely dormant for years. If approved, they are expected to complement existing courts, reduce the growing backlog of cases, and improve access to justice, particularly in specialized criminal matters. But during parliamentary debate, Minority Leader Alexander Afenyo-Makin strongly opposed the proposal, warning that the return of public tribunals could reopen memories of the politically charged tribunals of the 1980s, which critics say were associated with human rights abuses.
We have to be careful creating an analogous justice system. We know of what the tribunals did. The dark days of Ghana, we are revisiting it on Ghanaians in this democracy? No.
Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Dr. Dominique Ayeni, rejected those concerns, insisting the proposed tribunals bear no resemblance to those of the past.
What we are simply doing is implementing 126 by creating a lower tribunal that will deal with criminal matters that have been specified in the bill, including those of illegal mining. We are simply amplifying what is provided for in the Constitution.
The Tribunal Bill has completed its first reading and is currently before Parliament's Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee and the Judiciary Committee for further scrutiny before lawmakers decide whether to approve the reforms. For WADR, Nadia Tete, Accra.
In other news, Cote d'Ivoire recently hosted a ministerial forum on critical minerals, where African representatives called for a new approach to managing the continent's mineral resources. Meeting in Abidjan, delegates unanimously urged countries to transform mineral wealth into a driver of industrial development by prioritizing local processing and regional value chains instead of exporting raw materials. Here's Abdullahi Hassan with the details.
African ministers have pledged to make the continent's mineral resources a stronger driver of industrial development following a ministerial forum on critical minerals in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. In their declaration, they criticized Africa's continued dependence on exporting raw materials, saying the continent captures only a small share of the value generated from its resources. Africa holds nearly 30% of the world's reserves of critical minerals, including cobalt, lithium, manganese, and copper. Ministers called for greater investment in energy infrastructure, local processing capacity, and skills development to boost domestic value addition. The forum also highlighted the importance of regional cooperation, technology transfer, and financing to build competitive mineral value chains. The African Development Bank, which hosted the forum, pledged support to countries in developing bankable projects, financing infrastructure, and attracting investment for sustainable critical mineral industries.
That's Abdullahi Hassan with a report filed by Marcel Areston Blay in Abidjan.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
The guest interview focuses on the Accra Declaration on regulating political financing to advance integrity in Africa. It was adopted at the end of a regional conference held earlier this week in Accra, Ghana, organized by the Open Society Foundations, OSF. Delegates at the event say elections are increasingly being driven by wealthy financiers rather than the will of the people. Our guest is Mwende Mweke, Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at Open Society Foundations. She explains the details of the declaration.
The rising costs of politics has really risen through the roof. As you have seen the world over, including on our continent, the cost of elections is rising. And that also means that the cost of voter buying, unfortunately, is also rising. So what that means is the cost of politics continues to rise. It distorts representation because not everybody, not every citizen or ordinary citizen that wants to participate in political processes like elections around issues and policies that affect the common citizenry has the kind of money that a small number of elites would have to be able to compete in electoral office or in public office. So this in turn means that representation is distorted and limited to a few elite groups who are able to mobilize resources from different places, including illicit financial flows. And it also excludes young people and women who may not have access to these resources or the amount of money that is required today to run for elections or compete for office.
This should also be a concern for the ordinary citizens, as you stated. But in furtherance to what you are saying, would you mind explaining why should citizens or the ordinary Africans care about who funds politicians' activities?
Yes, Africans should really care, and ordinary citizens, each and every ordinary citizen that participates and wants to participate and be represented in political processes in their countries need to care about who regulates and who funds politicians because, one, transparency is about democracy. It is one of the tenets of democracy. Two, it's also linked to accountability. Where is the money coming from? Who is using it? Where is it being used? How is it being used? And is it being used in the interests of people that are seeking development and services from their public officials? So knowing where this money comes from actually influences how politicians and governments are able to account for that money, because if it is public goods and services, they ought to be accounted for. That is a simple way of ensuring that transparency is part of the democratic process.
Considering the political landscape of Africa, is there enough political will across the continent to implement needed reforms in fighting money in politics?
I would want to start by saying, before I answer your question, by saying that political influence will be fueled by how strong our institutions are. So there's a give and take there. And I think political will should actually start from the very fact that a recent UN report stated that Africa loses approximately $90 billion annually to illicit financial flows. If that will not will political will to address money in politics, I'm not sure what will, because this actually touches on our sovereign fiscal wealth. If we have $90 million annually on the continent being lost to illicit financial flows where it could be targeted towards sustainable development, peace and security on the continent. So that in itself should wield political will to address the reform of political finance or money in politics in Africa.
Mwende Mweke is Associate Director for the Democratic Futures Program at Open Society Foundation's OSF. Now to sports. Ahead of Sunday's FIFA World Cup final between Spain and Argentina, an image has gone viral on social media. A baby Lamine Yamal in the arms of a young Lionel Messi during a UNICEF photo shoot in 2007. Since then, headlines such as "Blessed by God," "Touched by God," and "The Baptism of the Gods" have flooded the media. Earlier in the tournament following Senegal's defeat to Norway, Sadio Mane also remarked that the gods of the stadium were not with us. So, why does football so often borrow the language of divinity? Imo Edit brings us the analysis.
The use of such expressions is not new. Earlier in the tournament, after Senegal's defeat to Norway, Sadio Mane remarked that the gods of the stadium were not with us, in quote, adding to a long list of football references that invoke the language of gods, blessings, and destiny. The imagery gained even greater prominence in the 20th century when Leni Riefenstahl's acclaimed documentary, Olympia, which chronicled the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Today, describing Lionel Messi as a god of football or referring to a player as blessed by God is generally understood as a way of acknowledging extraordinary talent rather than making a literal religious statement. However, some scholars argue that these expressions reveal something deeper about the place of sport in modern society. French sports sociologist Jean-Marie Brum suggests that modern sport often functions like a secular religion. According to him, athletes become the gods, stadiums serve as temples, pre-match ceremonies and national anthems become rituals, and supporters take on the role of devoted followers. In this view, elite athletes are elevated beyond admiration to a level approaching veneration. Some religious leaders have also voiced concern over this growing use of sacred language in sports, arguing that it can blur the distinction between celebrating human achievement and attributing divine qualities to athletes. As football continues to inspire billions around the world, expressions such as God of football or blessed by God remain part of the sport's rich vocabulary. Yet behind these popular phrases lies a broader conversation about the cultural influence of sports and whether the world's greatest athletes have come to occupy an almost sacred place in contemporary society.
Imo Edit with that sports analysis. And that's it on this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal, and online at wadr.org. Thank you for listening. Many thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maudu Ju for the technical support. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, including X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. I am Augustine Curley. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.